Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all speakers and participants. I'm Dora Trafor, and I head the Multilateral Market Access function in the Regulatory Environment Division at the Department for Business and Trade in the United Kingdom. I'm delighted to be moderating this e-commerce and conformity assessment thematic today, following the thought-provoking sessions we had last June on intangible digital products and cybersecurity, and the interesting session we had also this morning on the use of digital tools in good regulatory practice. This gives away the prominence that the digital economy, including e-commerce, has in our global economy and lives. While I continue to enjoy an old-fashioned shopping session in stores, the World Bank research indicates that consumers, especially in high-income countries, increasingly prefer shopping online, as opposed to visiting brick-and-mortar retailers. According to a World Trade Report from 2018, the value of e-commerce transactions was estimated to be 27.7 trillion in 2016. Well, they could have been optimistic, perhaps, as subsequent valuations are a bit less, but it's hard to really know the real number, as there are a few ways to calculate the widespread reach of e-commerce. These statistics must also be seen in the global context, where we know that the digital economy contributes more than 15% of GDP globally, and in the past decade, it has been growing at 2.5 times faster than the physical world of GDP. Alongside this economic growth, e-commerce also has benefits for businesses and people. For businesses, it really helps them reach a wider consumer base and trade more efficiently and cost-effectively by streamlining processes such as logistics and shipping. For consumers, we're also now spoiled with an expanded choice of goods, being a few clicks away from sourcing a product from the other side of the world. And that definitely is reflected also in prices, given the increased competitivity of product markets. Still, with great access comes risk. The COVID-19 pandemic increased the demand for e-commerce at a high speed, which exposed illicit traders seeking to operate in the shadows. So it is important that we have confidence in e-commerce and are protected if things go wrong. For instance, the increase of e-commerce goes hand in hand with the demand for cybersecurity protection. Ensuring compliance with technical regulations in this space can be trickier in e-commerce, which means traditional post-market surveillance might also be more complicated. Ensuring accountability becomes particularly difficult when regulators and standardization needs to account for large platforms like Amazon, but also smaller marketplaces like Etsy. In our committee, as of October 2023, members have notified around 30 e-commerce related measures. The majority of these, over 60%, were notified since 2020. This is indicating clearly an upwards trend. The notifications dealt with a wide range of aspects, such as market surveillance of these products, labeling, and obligations for online marketplaces. So, I hope that after today, we will better understand the challenges that e-commerce poses and learn about the different approaches that member states take. We will shortly hear perspectives from our diverse speaker list, who will cover standardization, conformity assessment, accreditation, and post-market surveillance aspects as they relate to e-commerce. So, before launching in, I'll briefly explain the structure of the session. To have time for questions and discussions, I have split this into 3 different sections. So we will hear about 3 speakers at a time, and then have a little bit of space, hopefully about 10 minutes for Q&A. We have 11 speakers today, so I'm conscious things will be tight, but I really hope that you will be willing to contribute to the session with questions and reflections to make this dynamic relevant and useful. So without further ado, let's jump into the first section, where we will hear a little bit more about the challenges posed by e-commerce and reflect on some possible solutions. I'd like to first invite Robert Pollock, Vice President for Brand Integrity UL Solutions from the United States, who will be able to tell us more about their experience in an e-commerce context and the need for risk-based approaches to conformity assessment. Robert, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you. Let me get my PowerPoint up here and see if this technology works like it did this morning. So can you see my slide?
Not
Hello?
yet.
Not yet.
Yes, we can see the slides now. Please go ahead.
Okay, good. All right, I always worry with the technology. So thank you for the introduction. I'm the Vice President of Brand Integrity at UL Solutions, and my responsibility is for developing and implementing our UL Solutions global market surveillance and brand protection strategies and initiatives. Market surveillance is responsible for investigating compliance and safety concerns with products that bear the UL mark. Brand protection is responsible for investigating the misuse of UL brand, including the counterfeit UL marks. As I go through my presentation, you will see how this relates back to e-commerce. I've worked at UL for over 45 years. I'm an engineer who works in the legal department, so I work with lawyers every day. And it's quite an interesting experience working between the engineering world and the legal world as to how to make sure each side understands what's going on there. Let me just advance the slide here. Okay, just briefly about UL Solutions. We're one of the world's largest testing, inspection, and certification bodies. And you may have noticed as Underwriters Laboratories in the past, they've gone through rebranding. We're now called UL Solutions, but our mission is the same, which is working for a safer world. And we bring our expertise together to help our customers, the companies we work with the consumers, always with the same idea of driving forward and how can we improve safety. And the challenges of e-commerce make it even more difficult than it was in the past. When you think about the fact that consumers before used to be able to go to a store, pick up a product and look at it physically in their hand and look at the packaging, look at the markings, it is quite different from what it is today, when basically everything is done from your home. On this slide, there's a lot of information, but the key thing here is on the far right circle. The UL mark appears on billions of products. I'm sure those of you in the meeting room can look at the computers, your power supplies, your cell phone power supplies, and you'll see UL in a circle. The challenge is, how do you deal with something that is on billions of products? It's obviously very challenging to look at everything to see if these products are complying, if they're being represented correctly. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The other thing that's challenging is being a global marketplace is we're dealing with all the different countries. Obviously, with the WTO, there are over 100 countries in the WTO, and each of those countries has their own laws for protecting intellectual property. In the UL world, UL mark is our intellectual property. It's our brand. And the misuse of that is of great concern to us because consumers are relying on what that mark represents. And when you're buying products through e-commerce sites, it is very difficult to check as to the authenticity and the correctness of any kind of mark on those products. Let me get to the main part of my talk here. What I really want to talk about is that of three key strategies, I think, for helping deal with this overwhelming idea of the internet and with e-commerce and everything that can be bought and sold. How do you really go about dealing with this? And as was mentioned before, you look at risk. Well, what is the risk we're really trying to address? Number one, we're trying to address the risk to consumers' life and safety. So you want to look at products that would create safety hazards based on how they've been performing in the field. Think of any product that includes a lithium battery. We have all seen in the press and news stories about lithium batteries starting fires in various places that have led to, in some cases, fatalities. So one of the things is you look at the type of hazards that have occurred, and you can find that out from your consumer product safety associations in your various countries as to what are the products that have actually are most likely to injure people. And though you want to focus on those. So you're looking at products that have the greatest fire, the greatest electrical, and the greatest chemical hazards for consumers. Another set of products you want to really focus in on are those products that detect when there is a hazard. Think of smoke alarms. Think of carbon monoxide alarms. These are products that need to function in order to give early warning to consumers so they can take action to save the lives of themselves and their families. And then think about products whose intent is to control or suppress a hazard. Think about products that, fire extinguishers put out a fire. Think about products that suppress a fire, like fire sprinklers. These are key areas of products that we want to make sure that what consumers are buying and are exposed to do comply. So how do you help consumers face the challenge of buying products from e-commerce sites? The three key strategies I will discuss today are about the availability of information, partnerships, and best practice guidelines. Let's first discuss the challenges faced by consumers in New York City. Many of you may be aware that earlier this year, New York City passed a law that products that incorporate lithium batteries, such as e-bikes, e-scooters, hoverboards, and powered bicycles, needed to be evaluated to the applicable safety standards, UL safety standards for these products, to ensure that the electrical systems do comply with the appropriate requirements. And why did they do this? Because there have been literally hundreds and hundreds of fires in New York City. And unfortunately, a number of these has resulted in fatalities. Consumers were buying products that they thought were safe, and they turned out not to be. Now, in passing this law, that was a great step forward for New York City. So as of September 15th, you should only be able to buy in New York City products, at least for e-bikes and scooters and such, that comply with the applicable requirements. But the challenge is, was mentioned, products are now being sold through internet and e-commerce sites. How would New York City police that? How would consumers be able to know what they're buying? So New York City came to UL Solutions and asked for our help. And one of the things we did is we created a website page that you see here on ul.com. And what we wanted to do was to make it easy for consumers to be able to verify that what they're buying actually complies with the appropriate requirements, that they meet the conformity assessment requirements for the particular products. So here's an example of, we show you the labels. These are holographic labels that are designed specifically for the e-scooters and the e-bikes. This text in red, you'll see UL Product IQ. That is our online certification directory where consumers can go for free of charge, can check to see what's being offered for sale, actually appears in our directory and has been certified by UL. You can click on either e-bikes or e-scooters or e-mobility devices, and that will go specifically to the product categories in our directory. So making information easily accessible to consumers so they can make informed buying decisions is the critical strategy for helping consumers protect themselves. E-commerce platforms and certification bodies need to do more to provide this information in a way that consumers can readily understand it and get access to that. The next strategy relates to partnerships. UL Solutions works closely with government regulators, Customs and Border Protection, and law enforcement agencies to confirm the authenticity of UL marks on products. In some cases, such as the example displayed here on this slide, it has resulted in stopping major counterfeiting operations. You can see here that this family of 5 members were sentenced to prison and had to pay significant fines for trafficking in counterfeit Apple and Samsung cell phones and power adapters. But not only were these products counterfeit, they were also dangerous. We conducted only one of our dozens of tests that we do for certification on about 100 of these products, and almost all of them failed. This one test, we didn't even run all the other tests. And this test was critical because it's a test that determines that there's proper insulation between the electrical mains in your house and the connector that you can touch when you're going to plug it into your cell phone, for instance. You need to make sure there's proper insulation in between those points, because if not, you could have an electric shock, and that electric shock could kill you. In addition to us doing this testing for the Department of Justice for this case, I was also asked to testify in the case to make sure that the jury understood the significant safety concerns with counterfeit products. And I think that's one of the things we all need to remember is counterfeits are not just somebody not paying money to a brand owner. In the case of UL Mark products, in many cases, people are not building the products correctly. In order to sell it for a cheaper price, they make a product that is deficient in the design and in the safety circuits that are supposed to protect consumers. So building partnerships with government agencies around the world is another key strategy that all of us should be expanding on. The last strategy I want to talk about is best practices. I have up here on this slide 2 examples of best practice guidelines that were developed through the ISO process. One is on consumer product safety, and one is on consumer product recall. I'm very familiar with these 2 because I was the chair of the U.S. delegation for these standards development operations processes. What these guidelines did was provide the global best practices so that companies do not have to go through their own learning process to understand what it makes. How do you design safe products? How do you address product complaints? How do you deal with product recalls? And what you need, the same thing for the e-commerce and conformity assessment area, is we need a best practice guideline that companies of all sizes and government regulators as well can use as a resource in helping them as they're developing requirements, as they're developing processes for what they're providing to consumers. And getting back to the first strategy about information, we need to make sure that consumers are getting the appropriate information to make informed buying decisions. E-commerce sites need to provide better information that's clear as to, who certified the product, what is the model numbers that are certified, who is responsible for the product, how do I file a complaint or concern with the safety or compliance of that product. So in summary, let me just go back to the key things are information, 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 information. Consumers need more because they're only seeing what's on us printed on the screen of their computer. They don't have the product in their hand. And once they get it, it's very difficult for them to exchange it because the seller is probably in another country on another continent. The second is, again, partnerships. The public and private sector needs to work together. We need to expand our working relationships and our share of information and realize the internet's a global marketplace, and the regulators and the private sector need to deal effectively with this global marketplace. And then the last session, the last strategy is, again, the best practice guidelines. Let's learn from each other. Let's help each other and how to improve the safety for consumers. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to our moderator now.
Thank you, Robert, for bringing to life the real magnitude and impact of ensuring safety here, and the informed partner share best practice approach, which we all know repetition helps to drive the message. So thank you for that. Moving on, I will next like to invite Wu Yang, Deputy Manager at the International Cooperation Department in the China Certification and Inspection Group, who will tell us about the challenges faced by certification groups and the possible solutions, including standards under development. Mrs. Wu Yang, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Dara. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'll first share my screen. So, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much. And my topic is about the challenges and possible approaches for conformity assessment in e-commerce. I'll first start. I'll first start by talking about the key features of e-commerce and challenges on product quality assurance. As we all know that e-commerce has a global source supply chain, which make it difficult for companies, especially SMEs, to ensure their products are compliant everywhere they are sold, because different countries may have different regulations, certification processes, and labeling requirements, etc. And also, e-commerce supply chain's complexity involves various participants such as platforms, sellers, logistic providers, etc. And it is very hard sometimes to define the product liabilities. So it's hard to find who should be responsible for cases like safety issues. And the second feature of e-commerce is that the transaction is in virtual environment. And this poses great challenges on authenticities of products. We all know there are issues of counterfeits sold online, and there are also issues of products are not as claimed. And also, we also face these challenges of fake conformity assessment certificates for products, as your counterparts just mentioned. And the third feature of e-commerce is that a large quantities of small packages of low value are transactioned every day. However, the customers has very limited capabilities to inspect and monitor every pieces of the products or packages entering into the market. And the last features of e-commerce is that it's very time sensitive. The preference of short-time delivery means that many small packages are transported via express couriers and may cause that these packages bypass the inspections at the borders. And to address all these challenges, participants along the e-commerce supply chain take many innovative measures. For example, platforms are setting access requirements for both sellers and products. And they are also educating the sellers about the compliant requirements of every market they are going to sell their products. And as well, customers also ask for information to be presented before the cargo arrives, including basic product information, seller information, and etc. And post-market surveillance agencies, they do a lot of random sampling tests from the platforms, and they also use algorithm and machine learning like web crawling to gather information about the risks of products sold online and to give red flags of these problematic products. And in China, the post-market surveillance agencies also provide links for conformity assessment data verification. And as conformity assessment body, we also got involved in all pre-market and post-market activities to guarantee the quality of products sold online. We provide suppliers evaluation, on-site verification, and product labeling services for products sold online. And we act as mysterious buyers to test the products sold online. And we also provide product traceability services for products from the manufacturers to the consumers. And for all these practices, have one thing in common, that is they involve a lot of exchange of product quality related data. Advanced exchange of product quality related data along e-commerce supply chain would be very helpful for product compliance in e-commerce. Transparent product quality information, once provided, will be used and accepted by many participants along the supply chain. And also quality data from customs reviews, post-market surveillance can also be further added and captured and used for continuous product quality assurance. For this data-driven approach, we need to be clear about what data is required and where to get this data and how to use this data in pre-market and post-market activities. And standardization can help a lot in this. And now there are some existing standards that are relevant for this purpose. And these standards can be roughly categorized into 3 layers. The first layer is semantic layer, like terminologies and ontologies standards. And these standards focus on interpretation of data, making sure that we have common understanding of what will be exchanged. And the second layer is syntax layer, which focuses on data formats and structures, which will ensure that the data exchange are based on the same rules. And the last layer is metadata layer. This metadata is information about data. They provide context and descriptive attributes that help to organize and manage data resources. And I would like to particularly mention 2 standards that are now under development. These standards are using the data-driven approach and are directly relevant to product quality assurance in e-commerce. The first standard is called Guidelines on Risk-Based Product Quality Data Interchange in e-commerce. This standard intends to identify major risk factors for product safety in e-commerce, and it will describe the types of quality data for interchange along the e-commerce supply chain. Currently, this standard is being developed in ISO TC 154, and the MP ballot will be initiated very soon. And the second standard is the standard for guidelines on sharing goods quality assurance related traceability information in e-commerce supply chain. And this standard is now in this stage in ISO TC 321. And the participation to comment on these 2 standards and also to join to develop these standards are highly welcomed. And this is my presentation about the challenges and possible approaches in e-commerce. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Wu Yang. That was especially interesting and always good to hear about international standards in the space. I'm sure people will have questions about that. I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Emily McIntyre, Senior Policy Analyst at Standards Council of Canada. She will elaborate for us on the possible impacts of e-commerce and the importance of raising awareness about conformity assessment. Emily, over to you.
So thank you for having me today as part of this thematic session. As mentioned, my name is Emily McIntyre. I'm with the Standards Council of Canada, which is Canada's national standards body to ISO and IEC, as well as an accreditation body that is a signatory to the IAF and ILAC international recognition arrangements. One of STC's key responsibilities is to support the development of standards and to use to promote the use of relevant standards to coordinate standardization across Canada. So this includes monitoring and responding to changing trends like e-commerce and their potential impacts. So as mentioned earlier, many of us will have heard that over the last few years, the use of e-commerce has increased substantially. And this increase is associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, where many of us decided or needed to make purchases from our homes. The pandemic is generally seen as an event that accelerated a trend that was already underway. And in Canada, we were definitely no stranger to this trend. E-commerce sales increased as much as 3.5 times, peaking in approximately January 2021, and by mid-2022 remained almost 3 times as high, while in-store sales have seen a much smaller increase. Oh, it's not going forward. Thank you. So of course, we're all familiar with the traditional way in which we purchase products in a store environment. It's quite linear. As a consumer, we don't typically think about these roles and responsibilities of the various players in this chain. When I purchase a product off a shelf, I expect, for example, that it is safe for me to use. So in order for a regulated product to sit on that shelf in front of me, it will have needed to meet the requirements outlined in the applicable technical regulation and relevant international standards, and will have needed to go through a conformity assessment procedure and become certified for conformance to the applicable requirements. So it's possible that this chain can become disrupted when purchasing a product online. So when I make that online purchase, it's possible that the regulatory framework that exists to mitigate hazards for regulated products may not have been considered or adhered to at all. So it's possible that the regulated product doesn't meet the technical regulations and standards in my country and didn't go through the required conformity assessment procedure. It may have even bypassed border controls that larger shipments of goods go through, like an inspection process. So in essence, and what is concerning in the context of the WTO TBT agreement is that the product may have essentially bypassed the frameworks we have in place to protect the health and safety of end users. So we're talking here about the technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures themselves. This is made more complicated, of course, as we know, because e-commerce is boundaryless. I can make a purchase from someone on the other side of my country or from someone on the other side of the world. So technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures are a means to mitigate and eliminate hazards to protect users. The use of e-commerce can have a direct impact on these exact checks and balances that we have in place. It makes it easier for technical regulations, standards, and conformity assessment procedures that we all use to be misfollowed or at worst disregarded, with less opportunities for our respective systems to uncover when this happens. So for example, when an independent assessment is required for a product to be placed on a market, it's possible in an e-commerce environment that that independent third party, like an accreditation body, will have never actually been part of the process at all. From a first-party conformity assessment perspective, e-commerce has potential impacts on the post-surveillance systems we have in place. It presents new challenges for how we monitor products in the market, given that we may no longer have that physical storefront to go to. Over time, and especially as a result of safety incidents or perceived or actual risks to health and safety and other hazards, uncertainty can be introduced in the market. So consumers may become distrustful if the product that they are purchasing online is safe for them to use. I would say this becomes a little bit more complicated and probably more important as the hazards that we are facing evolve. We have traditionally and still are concerned with hazards like shock and fire, property damage. E-commerce, though, twinned with our increasingly digital environments, creates new hazards for us. For example, there's an increasing focus and importance placed on cybersecurity, data governance, and more products are and will integrate artificial intelligence. So given the impacts on our existing checks and balances relating to those traditional hazards like fire and shock, how will our systems respond to new hazards in an e-commerce environment? So I'm wondering here specifically about things like privacy and bias. If we have standards and conformity assessment procedures in place relating to such important principles, how can we be sure they're adhered to when acquiring a good through e-commerce? One of the things I want to stress is the importance of equipping the right people with the right information about conformity assessment. And we've touched on this already a couple times today. This is a mechanism to counter unapproved and counterfeit products entering a market through e-commerce. And it's important in both consumer to consumer businesses, business to consumer transactions, as well as business to business transactions as well. So internationally, we have the IAF, who has developed CertSearch, which is a worldwide database that allows anyone to verify and monitor accredited certifications. It also allows you to monitor the various companies in your supply chain and receive alerts relating to the status of that certification. It also allows companies to raise awareness about their status through QR codes and a mark, which can be a strong signal. In Canada, there has been a push to raise awareness more generally about conformity assessment. So what is it? Why is it important? And even what conformity assessment marks look like. SEC worked closely with Electro Federation Canada and our authorities to develop a resource of certification marks for electrical products so that consumers can verify the marks that they are seeing or not seeing on the products that they're purchasing online. And an entire resource has been built around this by EFC. It also provides tips such as purchasing from trusted sources, checking your purchase once it has arrived before installing or using it, and provides contact for the authorities as well. So this information sharing and raising awareness is a key way that we can address the challenges posed by e-commerce. Another is domestic coordination. Each WTO member's national quality infrastructure will be different, but coordination between the different ministries, organizations, and agencies is crucial. So in Canada's system, just as an example, SEC as an accreditation body works closely with our regulators to make sure that requirements in technical regulations are captured in our accreditation processes where it's appropriate. This coordination can advance best practices and bring forth new ideas as well. Forums such as this thematic session, I think, are also really critical. E-commerce is a reality for us, and our existing obligations and disciplines are going to have to consider it going forward. So it's through exchanges like this that approaches and mitigation strategies that use the TBT agreement as their base can be considered and advanced. Being the national standards body, I would also be remiss if I didn't mention international standards. There are a few out there relating to e-commerce and being online, as we've previously seen. So using these standards whenever possible is really important. And of course, if there are gaps in what is available internationally, there are also opportunities to develop new standards to meet our needs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. And glad that despite the sort of diverse approaches comment earlier, I can already see the recurring themes of international standards and education guidelines coming through all your presentations. So finally, the last speaker in this section is Huifang Huang, Chief Market Surveillance Section, Integrated Planning Division at Bureau of Standards Methodology and Inspection in Chinese Taipei. Mrs. Huang will further elaborate on potential strategies to address challenges such as collaboration with e-commerce platforms. Mrs. Huang, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me share the screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Huifang Huang, a representative from BSMI, Bureau of Standards Metrology and Inspection in Chinese Taipei. I'm glad to join this session today. I would like to share with you some post-market measures we have taken to enhance the regulatory compliance of e-commerce products. Firstly, let me introduce our pre-market inspection system briefly. At BSMI, we designate over 1,000 types of products as mandatory inspection items. This means that these products must undergo the inspection procedures before they are imported or transported out of the manufacturing facility. Finally, the product must bear the commodity inspection mark to be considered compliant with the inspection regulations. You can see the entire inspection procedure from my slide. It's actually very rigorous and complex. Therefore, when conducting market surveillance, the most direct judgment of whether the products on the market comply with inspection requirements is whether they bear the commodity inspection mark on their body. Let me illustrate the challenges faced by BSMI regarding the products sold online. With the rise of online shopping, we face several challenges when it comes to products sold on the internet, since we cannot physically examine them. Firstly, the compliance information cannot be obtained from the web page because the seller does not consider it to be important information, and there are no regulations requiring this information to be displayed on the web page. Secondly, many amateur and newcomer sellers enter the online market without being aware of their obligation to ensure that their products comply with inspection requirements. Thirdly, there are too many products online that appear to not comply with inspection regulations, leading BSMI to receive numerous complaints from both sellers who comply with inspection requirements and the consumers. Due to the aforementioned challenges, BSMI has taken a series of actions. Firstly, in response to the lack of compliance information on web pages, we announced a regulation in 2017 requiring online sellers to disclose their compliance information on their web page. This enables consumers or regulatory authorities to assess whether the product conforms to the inspection procedures by web pages. Furthermore, we actively cooperate with e-commerce platforms. This includes asking them to remind sellers to disclose regulatory compliance information before posting products. Additionally, for higher risk products of external concern, sellers are mandated to publish compliance information, or they will not be allowed to list their products. Finally, BSMI will notify platforms to remove pages lacking compliance information. In order to assess whether various platforms comply with our aforementioned requirements and how they perform to manage the products listing on their platform, we also conduct evaluations of them by the end of 2023. In addition, we also utilize information technology to conduct more efficient checks in the online market. Previously, we relied on manual browsing of web pages to check compliance information. This was time-consuming and limited in processing value. Starting from 2021, we experimented with web crawling using product keywords on 9 domestic major e-commerce platforms to search for the presence of commodity inspection marks on their web pages. If absent, we will notify platforms to take down listings, particularly those with high sales volume and ratings. In 2022, a total of 20,511 pages were taken down. In conclusion, ongoing communication with online sellers regarding compliance issues and the regulatory challenges helps them enhance their awareness of regulations, thereby avoiding legal pitfalls. Secondly, cooperation with online shopping platforms contributes to the effectiveness of online market checks, as they are the true managers of sellers with the power to decide whether a product is listed or delisted. Finally, where web crawling increases the efficiency of online market checks, it still requires time for training and human effort to ensure the accuracy of its results. We hope that the further development of AI can further assist in the enforcement of market surveillance in the e-commerce. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your listening. I will give the floor back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Huang. And I think that concludes our first section presentations. It has been really interesting to sort of get a sort of diverse picture of the multifaceted challenges that we are all facing in e-commerce and the need for a multi-agency approach in our efforts to tackle this, drawing on the TBT agreement and others. I will now open the floor for questions from those in the room and online. I will perhaps take 2 or 3 questions and ask those and then see what time we've got. ISO.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thank you to the panel for this great discussion. I would just like to complement what was said around international standards, particularly by Emily. International standards obviously have an important role to play in building trust in the transaction of e-commerce. And I'd like to flag that we do have a technical committee, TC237, which looks at this particular issue and where we're developing standards. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to note that we have 17 participating members of our 167 members. So there is an opportunity to engage in this work and make sure that we build standards that incorporate the perspectives from all the countries and develop standards that can be applied globally. Thank you.
Thank you, ISO, for complementing that. I think there are questions from Canada, followed by Australia. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator, and I would like to thank the speakers for their interventions as of now. The initial idea of this thematic session actually came from Canada in the context of the 9th triennial review, and we're really pleased to see the high level of interest on this issue that this issue has generated. We can see by the number of speakers today, as well as by the numbers of participants online and in the room today. I guess our main goal in bringing forward the session was to raise awareness of the issue and exchange information on potential solutions and best approaches going forward. And I think the speakers, as of now, have laid out the table quite nicely to meet these objectives at the end of the session. So thank you very much. I would have a question, though, specifically for the representative from UL. So based on your extensive experience working for UL, I think you mentioned 40 or 45 years, what do you see as the best mechanism for international cooperation in this area between the private sector, intergovernmental organizations, and policymakers and governments, to ensure that the best efforts are put together to mitigate the risk of conformity assessment of goods traded via e-commerce? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That's quite a involved question you asked there, but I think the main part is the transparency of information, as was brought up by a number of the speakers. Information is very key, whether that be information about what's actually going on in the marketplace, from what people are buying, to what hazards are occurring, to what the product's been evaluated for, the conformity assessment aspect. All of it comes back to that information key. Consumers, regulators, the private sector all need information that is reliable and that they have confidence in. So to the extent that we can coordinate as how we share information and people can rely on that information, that I think is really the key. That's why we really look at our database as trying to make sure it's available to people so they can find things and be able to check. One of the challenges we all have is that products that are evaluated for certification by UL or by our competitors, the brands that are on them aren't always the same brands that are sold, how the products are sold. So there's a disconnect or a difference between how products are brought to market and the brands that are offered with in marketplace. So what the brand is that the consumer sees versus the brand that's in the records of the certification body or the government regulator. And so there needs to be some way to make sure that the identification of that product is clear as to what it is on both sides. And so that's one of the challenges we continually have, is that you have to know where to find the right information on the product, and we don't want to make things too complicated for consumers, but we need to have it so it's clear as to when someone's bringing a rice cooker to the marketplace, someone can actually find that information about that rice cooker in the appropriate database and not have to go and say, oh, there's a brand that's sold under, but that's not related to the company that actually submitted it for certification. So I think that information is the key thing. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robert, for picking that up very swiftly. Over to Australia now.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for the really interesting presentations. For me, I kind of see three themes really coming through in all the presentations, which is, of course, the importance of information sharing, the challenge that online sellers actually face in terms of ensuring their products meet the requirements for the potentially wide and varying requirements of the potential markets they supply to, and then the challenges in market surveillance. And then there are issues that, of course, Bob's presentation touched on in terms of the issues of taking that to the next step of enforcement. And that's what my question relates to. With anything with the internet, jurisdictional authority is always an issue of knowing who actually has the right to pursue what matters when. And I was just wondering if the panelists, and this may be relevant to later speakers as well, if they have any comments on how jurisdiction issues factor into enforcement action for conformity assessment in e-commerce.
Thank you, Australia. I might, I guess, invite briefly Robert first, and I think Mrs. Wong might want to speak to this one, and of course, other speakers are welcome to intervene too.
So I think I heard my name there. As far as the jurisdictional part, you have the issue of when the product is being offered for sale, but really it's when it crosses, the physical product crosses a border that the jurisdiction can take action. That's why border protection, border checking is sort of the key of looking at these various products, because it's when that product comes across the border that you can actually have someone take a look at it. And the challenge we've had is that in the past, large shipments of quantities of products were shipped, and customs would look at the large, trailer load of or shipload full of goods. Now, with the way products are sold and delivered by air, products are shipped in very small quantities, and they get below a level where usually the governments do not look at them. So we have this gap of products when they're sold individually or in small quantities directly to consumers, bypass all regulatory checks. And so I think the governments need to look at addressing the fact that because products are now being distributed and delivered to consumers in smaller quantities, that they need to really look at those aspects as well, and not just relying on what comes in a big ship at a port. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Mrs. Huang, would you like to also come in here, or do other speakers want to come in on this?
Okay, yes. My comment about the jurisdiction is because I think the cross-border platforms jurisdiction is a very difficult issue for the authority. So we try to educate the consumers to not buy the products from unboard or untrusted websites. And we try to cooperate with the platforms, with the domestic platforms to let our consumers can buy safer products. Thank you.
Thank you for that. If there are no other questions on this section, we can move on. Of course, there could be other questions at the end if we have time. So on the second section, I'd like us to take a closer look at existing frameworks on ensuring the safety of online products, as well as initiatives which aim to further improve this. Our first presentation here is from Leonard Grudberg from DG Grow in the European Commission, who will elaborate for us on the EU regulatory approach relating to market surveillance and compliance of products sold online. Leonard, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me participate here. I will talk about the market surveillance regulation and how we work on that in the EU. So briefly, in the EU, it's the member states that have the competence and the resources and do the actual market surveillance work. And we at the Commission set the rules and provide the framework, if you will, for this competence of the member states. And that's why we have this market surveillance regulation that covers over 70 pieces of legislation, for example, toy safety, machinery rules, electric equipment, and this regulation zooms in on what has to be done in terms of market surveillance for those other pieces of legislation. So of course it tries to cover several areas. I will focus in now on what we do to address online sales in the EU. If I can, yeah. So some new aspects. This regulation entered into force only 2 years ago in the summer of 2021. So it is quite new, if you will, but it has been in place for a while now. In terms of e-commerce, when do you as a market surveillance authority have the competence or the authority to act against a product? When is it placed on the market? I will say a couple of words about that, and also some responsibilities and obligations on what market surveillance authorities and economic operators have to do. Some new tools for market surveillance authorities, and in particular focusing on one rule, that there has to be an economic operator in the EU for some products. So we saw, of course, when we developed this regulation that the way people buy things has changed. More is sold through e-commerce, new actors in the supply chains, etc. So when is a product placed on the market? When is it first made available to consumers or users in the EU? That is, if it's targeted, even if the product is not actually in the EU yet, if it's targeted at end users in the EU, then you as a market surveillance authority has the right to act. And that, of course, addresses e-commerce sales. So if it's simple things like if you can pay in a European currency, if it's stated that on the website, if it's if the language is a language that is only spoken in the EU, that indicates that the product is sort of aimed at or targeted at end users in the EU, and then the authorities could take action if the product is not in compliance or if it's a dangerous product. And we saw that there are some tools that were lacking, so some instruments that were needed to effectively address and find out which products are non-compliant. For example, the way you would normally do it, you would go to the shops and randomly, or maybe not randomly, but you would buy products and bring them home or to your laboratory and test them and see if they are in compliance. When you buy online, it's not that easy. If you as a market surveillance authority wants to get hold of a product, you don't always get the average product. Sometimes you're told that it cannot be delivered, or that you get a perfect example of the product rather than the average product that reaches the consumer. So there is this possibility to buy undercover identity that is introduced in the market surveillance regulation. More importantly, maybe you as an authority have the right to, from economic operators, to find out who has the ownership of a certain website. That is the first step, of course, if you want to address problematic products sold online. So economic operators it's compulsory for them to cooperate with authorities in this. And if it's a serious risk involved in the product, you as an authority can remove the product, have a warning on the website, or have the economic operator, you can require them to remove the product from the website as well. And of course, we have all this, as I said, it's in the hands of the member states. So we have to establish a system where they have a network and exchange information and good practice and experience in general, but also about concrete cases. That's why we have the particular digital system, information and communication system for market surveillance for member states to exchange practice and know what actions other member states take. And finally, I would like to spend some time on this concept of economic operator in the EU. So as I said, the regulation applies to over 70 pieces of EU legislation, regulations and directives. And for some of them, where we saw that there was quite a high risk of non-compliance, risk of non-compliant products, and in sectors where many products were sold online. What can you do as a market surveillance authority? How can you, what kind of tools do you have if someone from outside the EU sells a product into the EU and you have no one to contact, basically? So that's of course why we have this rule on obligation to have an economic operator based in the EU, someone for the authorities to contact. So if you're an exporter in a third country outside of the EU, if you want to sell your product in the EU, you must establish someone here that the authorities can contact if your product is covered by certain pieces of legislation. It covers, for example, electric equipment, toys, machinery, and quite important sectors in a way. So that obligation applies when you offer the product to EU consumers or end users. That's what I said about placing a product on the market. If it's made available online to EU consumers, and it's found on a case-by-case basis that this offer is targeted at EU users, then this obligation kicks in. So there could be four categories of economic operator. Of course, if you're an EU manufacturer or established in the EU, you could take on this role yourself. Normally, in traditional trade, it would be an importer who would have to take on this role. And in any case, you could appoint an authorized representative, a special entity who specializes in taking on this role for economic operators that offers their services to work as a liaison with the market surveillance authorities. It could also be, if none of these three takes on that role, no manufacturer, no importer, no authorized representative, if you're a fulfillment service provider, you would have to take on this role. So, and fulfillment service provider, not postal operators, of course, but if you do the warehousing in the EU, packaging, putting address on the parcel or on the product, and dispatches, those 4 steps. If you do 2 of those, according to the regulation, you're considered a fulfillment service provider. And then you must, if there's no one else, you must take on that role. Otherwise, you as a fulfillment service provider should not provide the product in the EU. And what does it mean then? Of course, if there's something wrong with the product, or if it's not in compliance, it's still the manufacturer who can address those problems, of course. But you as a responsible economic operator, you must provide your contact details on the product itself, or on the parcel, on the package, some physical indication, not only digital, but indicating your address on the product for the purpose that the authorities can contact you to get the documents, the declaration of conformity or other technical information that shows whether the product is in compliance or not. Or if there's a problem, if the authorities get reports about problems with a certain product, you would be the liaison and cooperate with the authorities and help them get in touch with the relevant manufacturer. Finally, I should say, as I said, this has only been in application for 2 years. It's been, we have of course had many questions about it. We have provided guidelines for authorities and operators on how to be in compliance with this obligation, and we're starting an evaluation now of it. So we will know more hopefully sometime next year about how it's been applied, how efficient it has been, how has it brought extra costs for authorities or operators, and to know more about. I mean, the rule is not likely to change next year, but we will have a report about how it's been applied for a further policy development. I will stop here, I think, and be happy to take any questions if there are any later. Thanks.
Thank you, Leonard. I think that was very clear, and it will be interesting in the discussion to hear sort of feedback on how this feels for operators. I definitely now know how to place products on the EU market if I ever think about a career change. So I will move on to our next speaker then, which is Andras Zygmunt, and we're still talking about the EU. He's a legal and policy officer at DG Just in the European Commission. And we'll hear now more about the regulatory and non-regulatory EU developments for products sold online. Andras, over to you.
Thank you very much, and indeed good afternoon for everybody. And thank you also for giving me the chance to speak right after my colleague Lennart, because our presentations are very much complementary. As Lennart explained you, he presented specific regulations which are relevant for so-called harmonized product groups, while myself, I'm working on the general product safety regime of the European Union, which is also providing a safety net for all the products and all the risks which were not already basically regulated in the legislation Lennart was explaining you. So you will see that the two regimes
Andras,
are very...
sorry to interrupt. Can you double check that you have the presentation in presenter mode, because it still comes across a little bit small here?
I think I do, but I hope you can see that because I have it quite big now. Does it work better now?
There is a little button in there with the screen.
Yeah, exactly.
If
I
you
have
click.
that.
Oh, it doesn't come across for us, but can everyone in the room see the presentation clearly? I think we can go ahead like that if everyone can see the presentation clearly.
All right, apologies for this. For me, it indicates that it's working well. But if you have someone who to share the slides, it's also fine for me, and then I will just indicate when to go for the next slides.
Okay, Andras, we can do that.
Perfect.
If you just stop sharing your screen, we'll share it in the room and you let us know when to move on next.
All right. So until you are sharing the slide, indeed, what is very important and what we thought it's very useful for you to share is that how we are working on both legal and policy initiative in the interest of tackling online sales. And basically the reason for this work is that we can see a very high number of percentages of consumers buying online, as previous speakers were mentioning already. And we also saw that how consuming habits changed. If we move to the next slide, you can see some figures on that. Especially, we could see really high percentages of people buying directly products from originating from outside the European Union. So indeed, as Lennart mentioned, there were already some policy responses in the harmonized product area in this regard. Maybe we can move to the next slide, please, and then you can see the figures. And it was also very important for us to provide responses to these challenges also in the non-harmonized product area.
Sorry, Andras. In typical fashion, we need to experience IT. You are the lucky one. So we might end up going with your initial approach if you don't mind going back to sharing the screen, and we'll work with whatever is on screen.
All right. Do you see it now, or?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So indeed, what is important to mention that we needed to find very important policy responses for the trends we could see regarding online sales. So we could see, first of all, that more and more consumers are buying in the European Union online. So just to compare figures within 10 years, in 2010, we could see that around 53% of European consumers bought regularly products online, while this number went up to 73% only in 10 years. And at the same time, we also could see that companies were responding to this request, and European companies changed also their business models. 1 out of 5 companies in the EU is now offering their products to sell online. And of course, this trend, as I think in everywhere in the world, this was very strongly amplified by the COVID-19 crisis. And another important figure and trend we could see, and I think it's also something which we can share around the globe, is that consumers were more and more buying cross-border, and in our case, they were also more likely to buy products directly coming from outside the European Union. So we could see that in 2014, only 17% of consumers had experience in buying products from outside the EU, while in 2019, this percentage was already 27%, and until now, this again continued growing. And also we could explore very well thanks to the SafetyGate RAPEX Rapid Alert System, which is the system where in the European Union we are collecting information on corrective measures national market surveillance authorities took on unsafe products. That on these notifications, we could see that around more than 50% of these notifications concern products which had an origin coming outside the European Union. So these trends really challenge the traditional ways we are looking at market surveillance, and we needed to find policy and also legal responses to these challenges. So my colleague Lennart already explained you what the response was on the harmonized product safety area, while we were also working on a regulatory response for the so-called general product safety framework. And these responses materialized in the General Product Safety Regulation, which was just published in the summer of this year, and which will be applicable from December next year. So what was one of our main guiding principles in this legislation is to make sure that consumers enjoy the same product safety online as if they would go and buy in a brick and mortar store. So this guiding principle allowed us to introduce similar product safety requirements, especially for labeling and traceability information when products are offered online, as if the consumers would have access to this information in a store. So this means that if an economic operator on its own web shop decides to offer products for consumers, there is a number of list of key safety information, key product information, which has to be made available as part of the pre-contractual offer. Meaning that if the consumer goes on a website and checks information about the product, it has to see in this pre-contractual phase all the relevant product safety information as it would see on the product or on its packaging if it would go and check the product in a shop. The second very important point, and this was quite a revolutionary aspect, is that in the General Product Safety Regulation, we managed to introduce specific product safety obligations for providers of online marketplaces. And this means that now providers of online marketplaces are also part of the businesses which are addressed by obligations in Europe concerning product safety. And probably you heard about that in Europe we have a horizontal legislation, the Digital Services Act, which covers all types of illegal content. And what we did is that we built on the provisions of the Digital Services Act specific specifications and also clarifications or deadlines, for example, we introduced in the General Product Safety Regulation, which were necessary for product safety. So, for example, online marketplaces are now obliged to respond to take down orders of market surveillance authorities, and they have to take down the products in 2 working days. They also have an obligation to design the interface on a way that the traders can provide the necessary product safety information for each product listing. And they also have to make sure that the traders did so before the offer becomes public. And they have a number of very important cooperation obligations. We also managed to ensure that online marketplaces have to reach out to consumers in case of a product safety recall, to inform them about the recall, and also to share with them the recall notices and inform them basically on what are the next steps to be done. So it's very important now that providers of online marketplaces, while we don't consider them as an economic operator, they have an important role in product safety, and they have important obligations linked to the services they provide in relation to the products. And the third very important point in this regard is that Lennart explained you that in the harmonized area, for certain product categories, they already introduced the so-called responsible person concept, which means that there has to be an EU-established economic operator responsible for the products. We managed to extend this information and this requirement also for non-harmonized products. So now for all products which are covered by the General Product Safety Regulation, there will be the requirement to have an EU responsible economic operator in place from December next year. And this economic operator will also have additional tasks in relation to compliance checks of the product. We also understood the clear need for both market surveillance authorities and the businesses to have a coherent regime for market surveillance. So we aligned very much on the market surveillance rules of what Lennart was explaining to you, and extended also the powers of authorities, for example, on mystery shopping and website blocking, also for the general product safety area. And we also thought it's very important to underline that there has to be deterrent penalties, including for online marketplaces, to match with the obligations which I just mentioned to you. Nevertheless, we always believe that when we look at complex challenges such as on online sales, we have to see the full potential toolbox which is available for us. And this is the reason why we didn't stop at proposing only legislative solutions, legislative responses, but we always look for alternative and innovative solutions at policy level, which we can introduce to further enhance the safety of products and the safety of products sold online. And one of these main policy responses in this regard is the voluntary cooperation with providers of online marketplaces under the Product Safety Pledge, and under now the revamped Product Safety Pledge Plus. So just to give you a bit of history, initially in 2018, 4 online marketplaces signed the EU Product Safety Pledge, which aimed to really foster voluntary cooperation, always going beyond the legal requirements for the safety of products sold online. And these initial 4 signatories now extended to 11 online marketplaces. I put the list of the signatories here, and you can see that we have really big international players, and we have also smaller players which are relevant in certain regions or certain countries of the European Union. And we managed to revamp this cooperation framework under the aegis of the Product Safety Pledge Plus. And this Product Safety Pledge Plus now identifies 20 areas of cooperation or voluntary cooperation where the signatories are ready to go beyond the legislative requirements. It can really be linked to fast identification of products. It is also including monitoring and active fight finding on the basis of SafetyGate, the EU Rapid Alert System alerts, or other recall portals, including the OECD recall portals, and to take measures themselves. It also includes trader education. It also includes the exploring of the use of new technologies in the interest of identifying unsafe product listings. But we have really a large array of areas which we cover in this voluntary cooperation mechanism. And what is also very important, that the signatories in every year, twice, they report on their compliance and on their performance regarding this voluntary cooperation framework. And we could really see that how these businesses changed their models, how they quite impressively react now to government notices, how they quite impressively monitor themselves recall portals to show their performance on the Product Safety Pledge. So what I wanted to leave with you in as a summary of the short presentation, is that when there are such complex challenges, there is always a way to think of legal responses, but there are also ways to think of other policy initiatives. And at the end, these policy initiatives can also serve as a kind of laboratory of testing out in a voluntary cooperation framework solutions that might at the end become later on legal obligations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andras. I'm glad we got through it without further IT issues. Interesting to hear about particularly aligning requirements of physical products, online and offline sales, and particularly about the pledge at the end, which kind of shows how much providers equally are interested in maintaining the e-commerce space safe. I will move over to our next speaker for this session, which is Rifan Ardianto. He's Director of Trading through Electronic Systems and Trading Services in the Ministry of Trade, Indonesia. Mr. Rifan Ardianto, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, moderator. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, we can.
Okay, now let me share my presentation. Okay. Okay, first of all, I would like to say thank you for giving us opportunity to present the development of the e-commerce in Indonesia. My first presentation will be talk about the background of the digitalization and also the impact on trade itself. We know that the internet and digitalization is fundamentally changing the way of people, businesses, and also government interacts. In particular, the movement of data across national border or international border has begun to transform international trade in goods and also in services. Internet and digitalization allow for significant access to new markets and for new products and services, whilst also having a significant disruptive and transformative impact on many industries. Internet and digitalization also have a benefit to reduce costs in international trade, helping coordinating global value chain, diffuse ideas and technology, and also making the connecting between the businesses and consumer more globally. When we talk about e-commerce or electronic means in trade, we always talk about digital trade and also digitalization on trade itself. Digitalization on trade, we know that it is a part of the activities are still done online, most of doing offline. The input of tangible input, and then the outputs will be the tangible goods and services. And in another way, we also know about the digital trades, where the whole activities are done by online. We know that the input will be the digital, and also the output will be the digital goods itself. So digitalization on trade and also digital will be part of the e-commerce or trading using the electronic means. The standard and technical regulation on digital trade and also digitalization of trade also have helped us to facilitation on transaction and payment, and also it help facilitation on digital trade and digitalization on trade also. Standard and technical regulation also giving us the how we can deal with the digital enabler and how we can promote the emerging area on digital trade and digitalization on trade. Standard and technical regulation are needed to accelerate digital trade and also digitalization on trade itself. Some standard in digital trade and digitalization on trade still we are still identify standard and also technical regulation. For example, regarding to financial messaging and payment standard, e-procurement, e-commerce, digital identities, cross-border data, Internet of Things, invoicing, and so on. So there's still a lot of standard in digital trade that we're still looking for, and how we will develop to help the development of the e-commerce in Indonesia itself. Case of Indonesia e-commerce outlook, we know that by 2022, the value of Indonesia digital economy is estimated to reach about $77 billion. It's about 40% of the Southeast Asia digital economy. In the last 3 years, as we know that the pandemic COVID-19 accelerate the value of the digital economy, and we believe that in the next 1 or 2 years, the the value of the digital economy in Indonesia will always grow twice, about 130 billion US dollar in 2025, and will be increased 4 times in 2030. The e-commerce itself has contributed more than 70% of the Indonesian digital economies, and we know that we also record that throughout 2022 there are about 3.48 million transactions in e-commerce were made, and in 2025 we believe that Indonesia e-commerce is projected to grow consistently around 17 to 22%. We also have a challenge in e-commerce in Indonesia. The first challenge is about the product standard issue. We know that the cross-border transaction through e-commerce leads to the free flow of non-standard products. That's the challenge. And then the second challenge will be about the personal data security. The personal data flow protection concerned by all stakeholders, including the government itself. The third challenge of the e-commerce will be the cybercrime risk, including but not limited to money laundering. And the last one, of course, the foreign businesses, the legalization of the business entity concerned to provide a fair trade and equal level playing field in the e-commerce ecosystem in Indonesia. So that's 4 big challenges of the e-commerce in Indonesia itself. In Indonesia, we already have 2 major umbrella regulation, name it the government regulation number 80 of 2019, and also the Ministry of Trade regulation number of 31 of 2023. The regulation will be the regulation cover about the requirements and obligation of the all players active in the e-commerce, and then to cover also the electronic advertising, personal data protection, payment delivery mechanism, dispute resolution, and also of course the supervision and law enforcement itself. The e-commerce general arrangement provide extensive regulatory space, allowing certain sectors to create specific stipulation and regulations certain sectors, for example, financial, health, transportation, and so on. The e-commerce regulation objective, of course, the first one, we want to make sure that the e-commerce will increase the consumer protection. We hope that all products sold in the e-commerce meet the national requirement like a standard or technical regulation. And the second objective is we have to make sure that the e-commerce giving the level playing field among the players of the e-commerce itself, and also the e-commerce should be create the fair trade between the players. So that's the objective of the e-commerce regulation made by the government regulation number 80 of the 2019, and also the Ministry of Trade number 31 of the 2023. So the conformity assessment, as we know that it is creating the quality infrastructure, which is consists of standardization, methodology, and also conformity assessment. Of course, this quality infrastructure giving a 2 concern, the social concern and also the businesses concern. The business concern will be talking about the trading, quality, manufacturing, distribution, purchasing, and also another specification for the or contracts, and also for the social concern will be related to the health, safety, environment, economic well-being, further, and so on. So the conformity assessment technique, as we know that maybe all of us know about the conformity assessment technique, it is consists about the testing, the inspection, auditing, evaluation, and examination, and also the assessment itself. And we know that the overcoming traditional approach to conformity assessment in e-commerce, there's 2 big challenges: implementing the compliance. The online consumer purchase products directly from manufacturers around the world, and because this product cannot be found on the shelf, traditional surveillance method to conformity assessment is less effective. Health and safety, we know that many goods are purchased through third-party vendors, and accurate for verified certification is not always clear, leaving consumers in danger of buying product that may not be safe and posing a risk to health and safety. The approach, if we know that we have to change the approach in the conformity assessment in e-commerce itself. We have to make sure that there is assessment, the use of timely and accurate information from reliable sources to enable early risk assessment and clearance of the legitimate transaction in the e-commerce platform with minimum needs for physical intervention. And also we need the harmonization of and standardization, the need for comprehensive experience and knowledge from custom, government agency, academia, civil societies, and also industry, while keeping with the mandate of World Custom Organization in harmonization and standardization of the border regulatory process. The best practice for addressing the challenge to conformity assessment on online purchase product, we know that we have to make sure the transparency and accountability through collaboration of regulators and e-commerce, such as requiring sellers to disclose information about their product, country of origin, standard, risk, and also by verifying sellers' identity. The second best practice is risk-based conformity assessment by focusing the product that poses the highest risk to consumers by considering factors such as the product's intended use, the country of origin, and the seller's track record. Cooperation and information sharing, regulators, e-commerce platform, and other stakeholders can work together in sharing information regarding product safety in order to identify and address potential risks more quickly and effectively. And also, we not only by talking about the businesses, but also we also have to concern about the consumer's responsibility. We have to make sure that the seller's reputation, to look for sellers with good reputation and positive reviews from other consumers. Product description, to make sure that it includes all the necessary information such as country of origin, safety standard, and risk, and also another technical regulation that mandated by the regulation. Product price, counterfeit products are often sold at much lower prices than genuine products. The product packaging, to inspect for any signs of damage or tampering. So that's we need to educate the awareness of the consumer responsibility when doing the online purchase goods. The post-market surveillance on online purchase goods. Some activities might be already done and also maybe commonly done by many countries. From the collecting and analyzing data regarding to the product safety incident, consumer complaints, and also safety risk. Conducting market surveillance activities such as the product testing and inspection to verify safety requirements compliant, working with international partners, and also consumer empowerment. In case of Indonesia, we also have to make the facilitating for the consumer protection. We make the consumer complaint services as a mandatory in the electronic system of the e-commerce platform. The e-commerce platform are obligated to provide a consumer complaint service along with the contact for the Ministry of Trade, Directorate General on Consumer Protection and Trade Compliance system. And also we also make an exclusive web page, which means that the e-commerce platform that have already acquired the necessary permits or license will be listed in the Ministry of Trade website. The platform are also obligated to provide the information that they have been listed. So I think that's all my presentation today. Thank you. Maybe we can have more discussion in the discussion section. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ardianto. I find particularly interesting that we come back to consumer responsibility in this space, and I wonder whether that's particularly a feature of e-commerce, that there is this increased kind of push that us as consumers also need to review what we're buying. Definitely a helpful consumer for this room to check your reviews before you order something. So definitely that. I will finally invite for this section Alice Roberts, who's lead policy advisor at Department for Business and Trade in the UK. Alice would tell us about how the UK product safety review consultation is aiming to ensure the UK product safety is fit for the digital age. So Alice, please come in.
Thanks, I'll just wait my slides.
Sorry, we just need a moment. You might just be the second lucky person that has encountered the IT problems. Hopefully you're all up and running now.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here and discuss such and share input in such an important thematic session. As you know, my name is Alice Roberts. I lead the online supply chains policy as part of the UK's product safety review in the Office for Product Safety and Standards, which sits within the UK government's Department for Trade. In particular, I focus on developing proposals to update our regulatory framework to improve the safety of online sales as part of the product safety review. So first, I'll run through some of the activities that the Office for Product Safety and Standards does to improve product safety compliance in online supply chains. So the first one of these is monitoring and surveillance of the major marketplaces, looking for products that we already know to be unsafe and non-compliant and making sure that they're not available to UK consumers. The second is a program of risk-based and intelligence-led test purchasing. So this is where our intelligence and enforcement teams work together to identify categories of products that present high risk to consumers and may be available to UK consumers via online marketplaces. They then carry out test purchasing of these products from online marketplaces and carry out compliance tests and take action where appropriate. We also engage with the major online marketplaces, and this is mainly in order to drive a behavioural change in the level of responsibility that online marketplaces take for the sale of unsafe and non-compliant goods, and also to encourage an increased level of activity that they undertake to assure themselves that unsafe and non-compliant products are not being sold from their platforms. Where appropriate, we can take enforcement actions based on the legal powers that the Office for Product Safety and Standards have. So, for example, issuing withdrawal notices or also taking action against non-compliant third-party sellers, whether they're based in the UK or not. We also work collaboratively, both nationally and with our counterparts in other jurisdictions where there's a shared interest. And number 6 is that we have established and expanded a coordinated system of product safety checks at the border. So this includes proactive checks on high-risk products and also working with businesses and supply chains to create sustainable behaviour change. Finally, we also develop consumer information awareness campaigns. So some of our recent campaigns have included comms campaigns on e-bikes and also on button batteries. And this programme of work is all supported by research, evidence and analysis, including, for example, our consumer surveys. However, despite this, we have found that it is still too easy for UK consumers to buy unsafe and non-compliant products online, which takes me to the UK's product safety review. So the UK government is reviewing the current product safety framework with a view to enhance consumer safety, reducing business burden, and also meeting the regulatory challenges introduced by modern products. We set out our proposals for reform in a recent public consultation, and these included 3 main chapters. The first one is bringing products to market, then we have online supply chains and compliance and enforcement. So today I'll be spotlighting on the online supply chains chapter, where through the product safety review, we have an opportunity to modernise general product safety regulations that work to our increasingly online and globalised supply chains. So as I mentioned earlier, feedback from a public call for evidence suggested that it is still too easy to buy unsafe and non-compliant products online. And therefore, this can obviously make it easier for these unsafe products to get into the hands and be sold to UK consumers, but it also starts to create a lack of a level playing field, which not only starts to place businesses selling compliant products at a disadvantage, but it also can start to incentivize a bit of a race to the bottom. So therefore, we've set out a package of 3 proposals with the aim that products bought online are as safe as those bought on the high street. This is all whilst being proportionate and deliverable given the complex range of business models involved in e-commerce, as well as trying to future-proof the legislation for future business models. So one thing, for example, we are considering is whether and how to define online marketplaces in law in order to capture the different business models of today, but also in the future. And this is all whilst considering if and how regulation could be proportionate to their level of intervention. So to run through the three proposals, proposal 1 is for online businesses and marketplaces to have a duty to cooperate with the regulator. So this essentially means that they should take active measures to work with the regulator. So this could be, for example, to provide information and also to take appropriate actions if products are unsafe and non-compliant. The second proposal is for online businesses to have a due care requirement in relation to unsafe product listings. So this proposal really puts the onus on the marketplace to work proactively to remove and or prevent non-compliant products. And some of the requirements that we're considering in this space include, for example, collecting and verifying information on third-party sellers, consulting and using sources such as the UK government's product recalls and alerts page, and then using these sources to monitor their marketplaces for products that look similar to these and then taking action, and also introducing some kind of specific targeted monitoring and scrutiny of relevant product listings that they themselves can then identify and address listings that look like they could be advertising non-compliant or unsafe products. So essentially not just as a result of being informed by the regulator. Our third proposal is for increased consumer information on online product listings for higher risk products. And this is because we recognized, as Robert actually mentioned in the first session, that as a consumer obviously can physically see and inspect a product and its packaging when buying in store compared to online, this can cause a bit of an inequity between online and high street product information for consumers. We also found in our public call for evidence that the public say they're not always clear, that it's not always clear to consumers whether a product on an online marketplace is being sold by a third-party seller. So some of the types of information that we're considering for online marketplaces to display include product safety warnings or age restrictions to consumers, a clear indication of whether the product has been listed by a third-party seller, and then details of that seller, details of whether and what checks have been carried out on the product, and also the key product safety information which you would already find on the product's packaging. So we consulted on all these proposals and we invited views from across sectors and the public. Our consultation closed on the 24th of October and we received 108 responses across over 400 organisations. So we're currently analysing these responses and we'll use these to inform the policy development of the consultation proposals and also our plans for legislation and implementation of these. However, just because our consultation is closed does not mean this is the end of the conversation. So we will continue our engagement as we work through the views from the consultation and develop these policies. I'm also really interested to hear and understand more about the different approaches of other WTO members and hearing any lessons that you've learned. Some of the speakers already have been really enlightening and provided a really helpful perspective on this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alice. That was very interesting, and you mentioning business models of today versus the future might have inspired the final wrap-up question if time at the end. I'm not sure what is more impressive, all the presentations or my ability to keep this to time. So I think we definitely continue to have time for Q&A. So I will open now the floor for questions from those in the room and online. Okay, so we have a question from the UK.
Thank you, Dora, and thank you as well to all the speakers for highlighting some of the approaches that are being taken in response to this rapid increase in e-commerce activity. Noting the common challenges that we all face and the variety of approaches that have been outlined today, I'd be really interested in panel members' reflections on how in developing these approaches we can ensure to avoid unhelpful divergence, which can make it more challenging for businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. I think that is a quite cross-cutting question. So I might ask all speakers in this section to provide like just short reflections on that. Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if anyone was going to come online. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think we're especially interested to see what other countries are doing in this space. So it was interesting to hear the presentations from the EU earlier, and we've also been kind of looking into the current legislation across other countries. And I think events like today really help to kind of work out ways that we can do similar, kind of converge on what the legislation is doing. But I think yeah, I think just continue to talk to each other, really.
Thank you, Alice. Andros, I was wondering whether you'd like to come in, because you were also mentioning, or Leonard, if online, the varied approaches in member states.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dora. Indeed, actually, I would respond on two aspects. So, indeed, to avoid that there is kind of separation and differentiation on the rules at least at EU level. This is the reason also why in the general product safety area we are moving now from directive to regulation, and this is a very important change because regulations are directly applicable and binding in their entirety. So it means that businesses would have to comply with the same requirement in all the member states, and this was a very important requirement also to establish this so-called level playing field for businesses, that they will understand what is required at EU level. And second point, on more global level, we fully share the views of the UK that international cooperation is very important, and that's why also our unit is very active in the international side. We try to discuss at all international forums, including those that today we are having, and enjoying these discussions very much, to share experiences and share also our responses to the common challenges we are facing. And for example, if you look at the Product Safety Pledge, which is more about a policy initiative, indeed the OECD, for example, suggested a similar approach to take in its communique, and also this was followed by a lot of other jurisdictions throughout the globe. So it's quite interesting to indeed exchange discuss challenges, but also exchange our responses, which can motivate each other a lot on bringing the responses closer.
Thank you, Andros. And Mr. Ardianto, any reflections from Indonesia?
Yeah, thank you. I think I have the similar argument also. We know that Indonesia also still working on the implementation of because our e-commerce regulation is just launched this October, so we're still working on how we implementation about this e-commerce regulation in national level. However, for the global area, I think the international cooperation also making more discussion with among countries, or even we can start for the small region. For example, with Indonesia, we can start with the Southeast Asian, and then making the bigger with the Asia Pacific region, and so on, until the international level discussion. Also, international cooperation will be help to create the harmonization of this e-commerce implementation. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very interesting to hear everyone's perspectives, and completely agree that conversations such as today help us get into that direction. We have flag up United States.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentations. I think they were very interesting. My question is just sort of general in nature, but what happens when you're trying to enforce regulation or legislation what does it look like when you have truly an international marketplace and your consumers are buying from, I don't know, websites that are hosted all over the world? I have a 15-year-old son, and I know that he is always looking to find a good deal online to buy clothes. And so sometimes we get the craziest things from I don't even know where in the world necessarily. And so I just wonder, as a regulator, how do you deal with those kinds of enforcement issues, or even regulating something that it might not have even originated from a seller in the UK, for example, or Canada? Maybe that's a silly question, but I'm seeing my kid benefit and maybe some of us not benefiting, as you mentioned. So I'm just curious about what that looks like from a regulatory perspective.
Thank you, US. Perhaps I can go in reverse order and ask Mr. Ardianto for some reflections, followed by Andras or Leonard, and perhaps Alice wants to add anything.
Okay, thank you for the question. What have we done in Indonesia is that's why we launching the regulation of the e-commerce. One of the objectives is to giving the consumer protection itself. So we have some regulation that we have to make the mandatory for the digital platform to display the standard and also national technical regulation that might be mandatory. So it means that we have to make sure that the digital platform will be the safe place for the consumer, even for kids or also for the adults. So we hope that the consumer can more selective when buying online, but they can buy only for the safe product. For example, the product which already have standard or the national regulation itself. And also we also make some regulation to for example, we create also the registration of the digital platform that can be making a transaction in Indonesia. For example, if there's a international platform who wants to make the transaction in Indonesia, we have the platform must be registered first to the government. So we have to make sure that they will meet the requirement in Indonesia regulation. I think something like that. Thank you.
Indeed, just to add from the European perspective, for the general product safety regulation. So basically, it's a very important requirement that for all products which are covered by this regulation, they will have to have a responsible economic operator established in the EU. So this is very important also for market surveillance purposes. The contacts of this responsible economic operator will have to be put on the product or its packaging when the size of the product doesn't allow. And that will help authorities to reach out to this responsible economic operator also for market surveillance purposes. And another important point, which is clear in EU legislation, is that we are looking at the requirements to be respected for all products which are targeting EU consumers. So it means that even if the economic operator or provider of online marketplace is outside the European territories, they have to respect EU product safety rules. And we try to also educate them, for example, to make them understand what are these EU product safety rules. And this is the reason why we are running also awareness raising and basically capacity building projects, just as the SPEAK project, where we are indeed educating third country traders on EU product safety requirements so that they know what they have to comply with before they offer this product for EU consumers.
Thank you, Andras. Alice, final thoughts?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to come in and thank you for the question. I think as a regulator, I mean, I ran through a few of the things that regulators can do, but I think it can still feel like firefighting a bit. And this is why it's important to try and modernize some of the legislation to really put the onus on the marketplaces themselves to do some of the things like verification of sellers and targeted monitoring. Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. Are there any other questions from the floor or online? If not, I think I will now turn to the final set of speakers. to hear more about the various tools and approaches that we can now use to ensure trust in e-commerce, such as accreditation, cooperation, and technological developments. So our first speaker here will be Richard Collin, External Affairs Director for UCAS, the UK's national accreditation body. Richard will tell us more about how accredited conformity assessment supports trust and confidence in e-commerce markets. Richard, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. Good evening, good afternoon, possibly still good morning, everybody. Richard Collin, indeed, UCAS External Affairs Director. UCAS is the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. As Dora said, we're the UK's national accreditation body. UCAS is a private entity, a private organisation that is appointed by the UK government to the function of national accreditation body. That requires us to be a not-for-profit body and to act in the public interest. And what we do as a national accreditation body is to deliver a public authority activity of accrediting conformity assessment bodies. We're the only organisation appointed to do this in the UK. We have about 330 staff. We carry out about 33,000 days of assessment per year. And accreditation is a technical activity of rigorous third-party assessment of testing, inspection, and certification bodies against a set of international standards on a continual quality improvement basis. And is performed in the UK by about 1,000 assessors, so that's the internal staff and external ones, across a really broad range of activities, whether that's medical diagnostic tests or product safety, we talk about here, engineering, environment, forensic science, really broad range of different things. But while it is a technical activity, there's a whole load of real world implications and impacts here. So whether it's knowing that the tap water that you have it could be drunk, your oven is safe, your gas engineer is competent, your medical test is reliable. In each of those cases, there's an evaluation, there's a check, and behind that check sits an accreditation. So this is about trust and confidence in markets, for governments, for consumers, trust and confidence that comes from the assurance of the competence, integrity, and impartiality of conformity assessment bodies. Turning to e-commerce, accreditation is already used in this area, and there are quite a few examples, and Mr. Ardianto had some examples as well of standards, some of which have accredited conformity assessment. I put an example on here about EIDAS, which is the Electronic Identification Digital Trust Services, for e-signatures, where UK regulations require the audit of bodies that are validating e-signatures. Those bodies are certified, and we accredit those certifiers. Alice talked about the product safety review, talked about conformity assessment of products in relation to their safety. The UK regulations around product safety are agnostic as to whether products are supplied online or in bricks and mortar outlets, but nevertheless there is conformity assessment and accreditation of conformity assessment bodies supporting the product safety regulation there. But as we've heard highlighted from UL, from Emily, from Alice, and others, the online the increased use of online marketplaces brings challenges in terms of compliance, brings challenges in terms of greater availability of unsafe products. It's the advantage of going nearest the end that maybe I'm repeating things, but equally maybe I can say something beyond where they are. So recognizing that, knowing that, in my experience in my old life working in market surveillance for nearly 15 years, what I saw was that most businesses want to comply with the regulations. You get a few that are criminals who deliberately flout regulations, but in between you've got this group of those who either don't really know what the law is, or maybe they don't care too much what the law is. And there are different ways of approaching the different parts of the economic operators to get the best outcomes for consumers. I gave evidence to an all-party parliamentary group in the UK on consumer protection about online marketplaces, talking about the role of standards and accreditation. And it seems to me, and we've seen it, heard it in some of the presentations so far as well, that there's a role there for the encouraging better business practice through providing in developing standards with possibly accredited conformity assessment against those standards that then enables those businesses to see what's the good way for them to do better. And then that can improve, that can sort of pull the online marketplaces into better practice. You match that up with the sort of things Alice was talking about, the sort of thing Andres were talking about, then you get more holistic view, enabling businesses, also placing specific requirements on them, and then when necessary, having the enforcement to deliver when those businesses are deliberately breaking the law. We heard from Mr. Ardianto about digitization, which is a really important aspect for digital trade, for online marketplaces. Positive steps that we've seen within the UK with the Electronic Trade Documents Act that adopts the UN model law on electronic trade records, MLETR, and within that the requirements on product conformity assessment with accreditation sitting behind that. In UCAS, we've been moving forward as well. We heard about the IF International Accreditation Forum search database. UCAS has its own database of accredited management system certifications called CertCheck. We have all of the UCAS accredited management system certifications in that free-to-use tool. There are over 400,000 certifications in there that can be used by businesses, or indeed by consumers, to understand when conformity assessment bodies are accredited. Emily, you mentioned about the UNCFACT work as well, I think, in your presentation. So I won't talk about it too much, other than the Digital Products Conformity Certificate Exchange project is ongoing. We're supporting that work. That's understanding how we can digitize the results of product certification. That then goes back to the things that Rob was talking about at the start in marketplaces, being able to have that digitized assistance that helps enforcement bodies and others to know what's on the market, what's compliant, what isn't. So that digitization part is a really important part of the picture, along with the regulatory landscape. The final part of the jigsaw for me is about the multilateral recognition agreements on accreditation of the International Accreditation Forum and International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, the international organizations working on accreditation cooperation across the different areas of accreditation. And those agreements mean for the signatories, such as UCAS, that an accredited conformity assessment in one country is recognized as technically equivalent in another signatory country. And that global mutual recognition can underpin digitization efforts. It can underpin e-commerce regulations. It can support standards. It can support product safety conformity. It can support good practices in online marketplaces in a way that also supports international regulatory cooperation, in a way that helps to reduce technical barriers to trade that come through unnecessary duplication of product conformity requirements, product certification, service process evaluations. So very much our position that there's an opportunity to unlock the value and the potential of global mutual recognition agreements from accreditation that then enable the recognition of conformity assessment across different jurisdictions to support regulation and as a trade facilitating measure. Thank you, Tora.
Thank you, Richard. That was very succinct and on the point, bringing all presentations together. I think the mutual recognition is one way in which we can bring all our efforts together to sort of contribute to the same objective. And very interesting about, you were talking about providers that actually want to comply and sometimes they don't know. So a version of Hanlon's razor here of never attribute malice, which is adequately explained by ignorance. And I think we definitely need to sort of contribute to make sure that everyone's aware and on board with this. So our guest our next speaker for this section is Douglas Ballantyne, Senior Science Advisor, International Nutrition Policy at the United States Food and Drug Administration's Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. Managed to do that in one breath. Douglas will tell us more about various approaches relating to public health labeling information. Douglas, over to you.
Yes. Thank you for the introduction. So I'll focus, because FDA's major focus is food and beverages, I'll focus on what's going on both domestically and a little bit internationally and some of the challenges with e-commerce in the food and beverage environment. And I'll talk a little bit about international standards, as many of us work in Codex, where a lot of the work in Codex is about setting international standards in the food space, both from a nutrition and a safety perspective. Just need my presentation to come up. So thank you. So as you've heard earlier, starting before, but particularly through the COVID pandemic, what we've seen is the online sale of foods and beverages has accelerated beyond the rate it was before. In 2021, the sale of food and beverages in the United States online was at around 100 billion. It's probably close to 200 billion today. By 2027, it's expected to go up to about $60 billion online sales. What that represents in the United States is in 2022, about 11% of food sales was food sale dollar purchases were online. By this year, it is now, it's estimated to be by 2027 up to about 14%. So while it's still relatively small, it does represent a big part of the food and beverage market. What we see in talking to our industry colleagues is it's complex. There's somewhere more than 30 different e-commerce models through which food and beverage sales are done and distributed and distribution systems. So it is quite complex. So thinking about how to have both safety and conformity assessment with regulations in that complex environment is a challenging one. In terms of international work, one of the things the Codex Committee on Food Labeling has been considering guidance on what should consumers see when they go to a food information page when they want to make an online purchase of a food or beverage product. And the UK is actually the chair of that particular working group. So they're well represented in the e-commerce space. This is intended to be guidance for the members and global guidance. I think what is generally agreed by all of the members is the mandatory labeling information that is required on the label of food products sold in various places should also be available to consumers when they go to a food information page. And so we're talking about how to do that. Second aspect is oftentimes safety information, particularly allergen labeling, is also critical to inform consumers when they're going to make an online purchase. And they ought to have access to that appropriate information as well. We are still discussing a bit on what to do about providing consumers with information about the time remaining from the date label of a best use or best buy date from the time they might receive it. So with the concern that consumers shouldn't be getting out of compliant product when it arrives home, although that information should be on those food packages when it arrives at people's houses. The other aspect we're trying to decide is in our labeling regulations and codex, it's similar in the United States. We do make certain exemptions for particularly small packages where there's just simply not enough room on the packages to provide all of the information that you'd like. And so there are exemptions. And so the discussion is whether or not those exemptions should be continued on product information e-pages, or whether or not additional mandatory information can be provided because there are no space limitations. And so those are some of the discussions we're having in that particular space. I think the key thing that I'd like to say is basically there is agreement that consumers should have access to labeling information at the time of point of purchase. And then I think what you'd see is then from a compliance point of view, at least for packaged foods, that labeling information would be on the labels of products when it's received by consumers. We're also considering what to do about e-commerce and providing guidance on e-commerce in the United States. As I said, there are many, many business line models. I think what we would agree is that products sold via information and packaged foods should have labels that comply with all of our labeling regulations when they arrive in a person's home. So they aren't really treated differently from products that are sold in a brick and mortar store. So from a labeling perspective, consumers, when they receive them, should get all of that information. Would make a comment that one of the things you see, and it was just noticed by Rich, that e-commerce provides space for entrepreneurs and small business owners to get into sales that they can't easily do in large retail settings, simply because they aren't able to get into the stores and get shelf space. So you see them entering into the e-commerce marketplace. And I think oftentimes, as we just heard, they aren't really aware of many of the rules and requirements. We encounter that in the United States and have to oftentimes work with them to bring them into compliance when they're out of compliance because it is an intent. I think it also is a challenge when you start to look at the international landscape, where while many of us all have to a degree of conformance to the Codex standards for labeling and many of the other commodity standards, and our regulations aren't completely aligned when you get down into many of the details in terms of things like front of pack nutrition labeling, some consumer advisory statements and that sort of thing. So I think it becomes more complicated when you start having international trade of products that go through new supply chains. We would say that, again, within Codex and within the United States, that all package labels should have the mandatory information that the business owner or importer needs to be clearly, and physical address needs to be specifically on the labels. So again, from a compliance point of view, if that label is on the product information page, then the responsible party can be identified. And if it's not there, then they would be out of compliance with regulations. From a safety perspective, it is a similar sort of discussion where we have many local and global safety standards. I think one of the things that we'd expect is that the safety requirements for products sold online should be the same as the safety requirements in a retail store. One of the issues is internationally, we don't all have exactly the same safety standards. So when you start having things that go through unique import pathways, you might be getting things coming into the country that are that might not be compliant with local, and that may or may not be a good thing. So is the complexity of compliance and the requirements to meet that complexity with all of the international standards balanced by flexibility and appropriate risk management, I think is things that we all need to consider as we look at particularly the ability of entrepreneurs and small businesses to take advantage of e-commerce as a way of building businesses both at a local level or internationally. And so how do we help them to be able to be compliant? We have conducted a online survey, a request for product information for online grocery stores in the United States earlier this year. We have gotten feedback, and what was acknowledged was the complexity of the e-commerce business models. There was a recognition of a need for standardization and consistency across platforms. There was an agreement of informative and clear and transparent information and mandatory public health information. So I think there's general alignment what we're hearing from our retailers in the United States and what we're seeing through our discussions in Codex. I think one of the things in the United States we've been doing that comes to safety and what we've heard about conformity assessment is with our Food Safety Standards Modernization Act and looking at food safety, one of the things we're looking at is mutual recognition with big trading partners, where you can have mutual recognition of food safety standards and requirements in many places around the world. And when you have that in place, it would and aligned, then food products coming from those particular countries that meet the safety recommendations of those countries could easily come into the country. I think a challenge is where we don't have mutual recognition, and where in the United States we would then normally go do inspections of big manufacturing and facilities to make sure that they comply with safety requirements. It becomes more complicated when you have an online e-commerce supply chain to be able to necessarily do that and keep track of doing that. So I think those are some challenges that we face from a food safety perspective as we look at how to deal with the growing e-commerce environment. The last thing I'll bring up is that the e-commerce world has brought in new business models, particularly in foods. So for example, one of the new business models that's come up is this whole idea of food kits, where consumers can go online now and buy ready to prepare meals that ship directly to their home. And those particular meal kits and companies have never been in retail stores. These are coming from entrepreneurs that are looking for ways of making business that I've said that are offering consumers with value and preparing high quality meals at home. However, those particular business models are outside of our normal regulatory authorities and potentially pose some safety concerns that we're looking at how to address. So one of the things that we're looking at addressing is we have a food code that provides both food service operators and retailers information about safety information and safety compliance. And we're looking at how we might update and amend that food code to address these new business models, to assure that there's safety in those particular business models or any new business models that emerge from the e-commerce platforms. So we are, like I said, we're in partnership with the numbers. I think one of the things in the US is prepackaged food in the US. One of the things that leads to some compliance challenges is that we do post-market surveillance, not pre-market surveillance. So we're only made aware of products that would be out of compliance after they've come into this country, if they're not imported or sold, particularly when it comes to labeling, misbranding, or safety issues. So we're dealing with them after the fact, not before they enter necessarily the consumer market in all cases. And therefore we do it from time to time have safety issues, although I would say they don't represent our biggest safety challenge at this particular time. We want to build relationships with third-party delivery companies. For example, one of the things that emerged in e-commerce is things like Grubhub and Uber Eats. Those are more considered to be in the restaurant trade remaining than rather in the normal e-commerce trade. So we're still looking at them in the United States as part of the restaurant world as opposed to the retail food world. There may be a merger of that in the future, and we'll need to see how that comes out. So as I said, we are looking at developing guidelines potentially in the United States for labeling of foods sold on e-commerce and the information that needs to be available on the product e-information pages. And we're continuing to collect information from the big e-retailers about ways to do that would be appropriate and not too burdensome on businesses. We're continuing to work with CCFL on international guidance in this particular space. And one of the things we're doing is, like I said, is we're beginning to update our food code, which provides both restaurant and retailers with safety requirements and safety guidance that they need to comply with. And we're looking at updating that so that it will be modernized to deal with e-commerce situations. And they'll have those tubes available both in writing and in web and iCloud. So we're beginning to look at how we use the digital world to provide that information in addition to partnerships with our retailers. And finally, in recognition of the new business models, unfortunately, I can't show you this little video that our food safety people have put together for consumer information, because I think we heard a lot earlier about the desire to provide food information or appropriate information to consumers so that they can make informed choices. We view that as an important thing in the United States, and consumers do need to be able to make informed choices and have the information to make those choices, particularly in the food space. So in lack of regulating these new meal kit sort of areas, we've put together a video to give consumers information about how they can track and monitor the foods they're getting through the e-commerce supply chain to make sure that temperature and safety requirements are met, so that when it arrives in their house, they can have confidence that they can actually use the product, or flag that it is not safe and take action to send it back. So I think this is one example of a way we're trying to take action to inform consumers while the regulatory process catches up. And this has been loaded onto the website with all the other presentations and information. So I'd encourage you to have a look. It's kind of a fun little video. And with that, I'll close my remarks for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas. And yeah, sorry we didn't get to screen the presentation, but I'm sure everyone's going to go right there immediately after the session. It was really, I think, helpful to be reminded of, we spoke today in the session about hidden sort of risks on data and cybersecurity, but coming back to the big obvious risks, I think this was a very useful presentation. So I will be moving on to our final speaker for this section and also for the thematic, which will be Lin Feng, who is the Deputy Director for China Certification and Accreditation Institute in the State Administration for Market Regulation. Mr. Lin will tell us more about the conformity assessment approaches based on blockchain technology. Mr. Lin Feng, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator. I will share my screen. Is that okay? Is that the PPT?
Yes, if you put it in presenter mode for us, that would be great.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. I'm Lin Feng from CCAI, the China Certification and Accreditation Institute. It's an honor to speak here and share our practice and views.
Mr. Lin Feng,
yes?
There is a little presenter mark at the bottom. Yeah, if you could click that, that would be great.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that should work.
Okay, good. Oh no, maybe. Okay. CCAI is a research institution specialized in the research in certification.
Apologies, but I think we are onto a blank screen now. So perhaps you can revert to your previous setup.
Sorry.
If you press the escape button, that should bring it back.
Oops.
Yeah, we're back to the original setup. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yes, before 2018, CCAI is directly affiliated to CNCA, the China Certification and Accreditation Administration. Since 2018, CNCA was merged into the newly established State Administration for Market Regulation, that is SAMR, and the CCAI became affiliated to SAMR. This is a very brief introduction of my organization. Okay, good. In recent decades, China had enjoyed a rapid development of e-commerce. By the end of 2022, the national e-commerce transaction volume had reached 43.8 trillion RMB yuan. As a vital part of NQI, China fully acknowledged the important role of conformity assessment in ensuring and promoting the progress of e-commerce. In 2015, the central government issued the instruction to utilize conformity assessment to support and promote the development of e-commerce. In 2015, in order to address the consumer concerns about the quality and safety of online purchased product, CNCA launched the platform named the Certification and Accreditation Cloud Bridge. This platform serves as a mechanism for sharing certification information between the national CCC certification database and the e-commerce platforms. The Certification and Accreditation Cloud Bridge enables e-commerce platforms to access real-time information from CNCA's CCC certification database. This allows the effective and accurate management of online goods through the collection of certification information. It ensures the quality of goods on the platform and strengthens supply chain management. Consumers can check the CCC certification mark and detailed certification information of goods on e-commerce platforms, helping them avoid unlicensed and counterfeit products. The Cloud Bridge has been used by over 20 mainstream domestic e-commerce platforms, covering more than 90% of the market share in the domestic B2C e-commerce market. Since its launch, it has verified certificates online over 280 million times and authenticated over 5.8 million businesses. This platform connected regulatory authorities, e-commerce platforms, certification bodies, and consumers, providing quality assurance for e-commerce transactions. The Cloud Bridge is based on a centralized database. It works well in the domestic e-commerce market, but in the scenario of cross-border e-commerce, since there is no such a centralized conformity assessment result database in place, so we need a new approach. A decentralized data sharing mechanism is needed for market supervision of cross-border e-commerce. The application of blockchain technology in conformity assessment make it possible. Since 2019, CCAI has been focusing on exploring the new trust model of conformity assessment plus blockchain, fully integrating the institutional trust of conformity assessment with the machine trust advantage of blockchain. This utilizes machine trust to ensure that the information obtained during the conformity assessment process is authentic, reliable, and tamper-proof, while using institutional trust to address the shortcoming of blockchain technology in ensuring the compliance and effectiveness of on-chain information. Especially, there are three aspects. Firstly, there is a shift in information collection method from traditionally manual collection to automated collection, enhancing the objectivity of conformity assessment activities. Secondly, conformity assessment result and process records are stored on the blockchain, making them tamper-proof and traceable, enhancing the transparency of the conformity assessment process. Thirdly, conformity assessment can change from sampling assessment to full sample assessment, and from one-time assessment to real-time assessment, enhancing the accuracy of conformity assessment result. And most important, decentralized conformity assessment result database can be found by this technology. By implementing the aforementioned mechanism, a consortium blockchain can be established bring together cross-border e-commerce platforms, product manufacturers, conformity assessment bodies, and regulatory authorities as nodes in the consortium chains. This integration allows for real-time access to verifiable and traceable conformity assessment information of products on e-commerce platforms, ensuring product safety for consumer and regulatory authorities. Additionally, the platform provides a more secure method and channel for supervision, enabling it will reduce the risk and the cost for international trade and provide support for the development of cross-border e-commerce. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ling Fang. That was an excellent sort of wrap up to the presentations today, looking at this blockchain technology approach. To make sure I've got time for questions, I'll open straight away for everyone in the room and online. I do have a last final question for everyone, but I'll first see whether there are any from the floor.
Thanks for some really interesting presentations. I was wondering, when a product on an e-commerce site fails an accreditation or a post-market check, is there the right balance of accountability and sanction between the third-party seller versus the e-commerce site itself? Or I suppose, are there enough powers to hold e-commerce sites accountable for the products on them which are sold by third-party sellers? Or is it about right in the current situation?
Thank you, Kay. I'll hand over to the speakers, perhaps start with Richard and then see whether Douglas and Ling Fang has thoughts.
Thanks, Dora. I think that's fundamentally a regulatory question. That's a question about powers and enforcement powers and so on. So it's not so much a market-based conformity assessment and accreditation question, I would say. So a little bit difficult to answer, but there are aspects in there that relate to conformity assessment and accreditation. So how, if a product has a certificate, an accredited certificate, how can the organisation that's done that be held to account if the product then doesn't meet the requirements? And there are things within the conformity assessment and accreditation world to highlight product failures and so on. I won't go into details of complaints procedures and so on, but never, unsurprisingly, organisations that work in the quality world, we have all of those procedures to enable businesses, consumers, or whoever to come along and say there's been a problem with the conformity assessment and what does that look like. But in terms of actions against the selling organisations, I think that's a national regulatory issue.
Thank you, Richard. And just to say that I definitely value, I think, everyone's views on this. Despite not being regulators, we all need to work together to learn from each other's experiences. So thank you for that.
The same product oftentimes is sold by other distributors and retailers on Amazon through their Amazon stops. And Amazon itself then oftentimes sells exactly the same product that Amazon's bought. And so under that circumstance, if the product's, it's complex in whether Amazon, and then other times Amazon doesn't sell that particular product at all. It's just a distributor. So is Amazon really accountable when it's really just a distributor using their online shopping model? So I'm not the legal person, but I do think it's a good question, but it's a complex one.
Thank you. Are there any speakers that want particularly to come in on this? Perhaps I'll give you a minute. Great. Well, you have learned that you have asked a very difficult question that no one's got the answer to, yet nevertheless had to be asked. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Oh, we have Chile.
Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de agradecer a los 11 oradores de esta sesión temática Creo que nos vamos con mucha información, así que en nombre de la Delegación de Chile agradezco especialmente a quienes nos han proporcionado esta información. Mi pregunta es para el señor Douglas del FDA y consiste en si su presentación se refirió en particular a alimentos excluyendo bebidas alcohólicas o también estaban consideradas pese a que no fueron ahí mencionadas, porque entiendo que por plataformas online también uno puede comprar bebidas de este tipo. Muchas gracias.
So thank you for that on alcoholic beverages. In the US, most alcoholic beverages are regulated outside of FDA by DBT. And there are quite some complicated interstate commerce laws in the United States that govern shipping of alcoholic beverages from one state to another. Some states allow it freely, some states don't. So I think the alcoholic beverage thing is unique. So I would say for the most part, what I said was keeping alcoholic beverages outside of that that sort of food and beverage space.
Thank you, Douglas. So I think unless there are any other further questions, and feel free to put your flag up if there are, or raise your hand online. I will ask a question of, I guess, all our speakers, and I'll ask you to be brief, if you can. So you have a magic wand. What would it be the number one change you would like to see in the e-commerce space? Perhaps order is less important, but Richard, just because you're sitting next to me, I will pick up on you again and I'll ask everyone at the table and then we'll go online to all the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that Fan expressed my wish very well at the end of his presentation. Really, my wish is sort of over time that when looking at national policies to consider and to increase the use of international standards and globally mutually recognized accredited conformity assessment that then drives good practice, increases compliance, supports good regulation, while reducing technical barriers to trade.
Yeah, I think I would say that the most important piece would be the availability and accessibility of information for consumers. I see a big role to play from accreditation bodies, standards development organizations, conformity assessment bodies, and e-commerce platforms as well. So I think that availability of information is paramount. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think online marketplaces have really enabled more global supply chains and has kind of encouraged innovation and new entrants and SMEs. And yeah, we need to make sure that doesn't come at the expense of product safety. I think one really interesting blue sky idea could be kind of product passport. So this is where you get kind of data on product safety along the supply chain, and it kind of follows that product throughout its whole life cycle. And can be verified along the way.
Well, I don't know that I have much more to add. I think the two things that I would say is that consumers have access to the right information they need to make informed purchase decisions online. But then I think having the ability to harmonize around international standards to facilitate trade, particularly when it's in e-commerce, is really critical to that, with a focus particularly on assuring consumer safety.
Thank you all. I'll move now online. Ling Feng, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, I think because online shopping is very common in China, we think online shopping is the same. with offline shopping. So but the situation is more complicated because online shopping may covers different countries. So I hope in the future, the international cooperation and collaboration could be, more and to, provide a safe and, good marketplace for the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ardianto? Okay, I might ask Andres or Leonard if they're still online.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Dora. If I could ask something on the wish list, is really indeed that companies also acknowledge and realize that if they do extra efforts for product safety, it's also helping them to gain consumer trust. So it's really a common interest that everyone takes its role according to the supply chain.
Thank you. Mrs. Huang, if you're still online. If not, Robert, perhaps you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. So I think the one thing that would be helpful would be simply to have a picture of the label that's on the product that shows, typically if it's electrical, it'll be electrical ratings and the certification mark with the model number. That's one photograph would give you enough information for the consumer, for the regulator, for the certification body to verify whether or not the product being offered for sale is being represented correctly and has the certification that it's supposed to have. So just a picture of that label, kind of like when you're doing a safety gate RAPEX and you have the pictures. Pictures worth 1,000 words, maybe 1,000,000 words in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Mrs. Wu Yang, if you're still online.
Yes, thank you. I don't have much to add, but I agree with all speakers, and I think the most important thing is the transparency, accuracy, and trustworthy of the information that could be accessed by the consumers and also all the participants along the e-commerce supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I've been making a poll, and we have about 3 votes for information availability for consumers. International standards has 1, 2 for collaboration between companies and others, and about 2 for a system of passports or something like that. Obviously, these are all interrelated, but just kind of interesting to see that in a space where we feel like the answers then are obvious, there's still various ways of achieving that. I think that concludes my moderation for today. I would like to thank all the speakers for their valuable and insightful contribution to the session, as well as the participants who have really made this session more interesting and enriching. I believe that this has revealed that e-commerce challenges are international in nature and may be best addressed while we work together. I'd also thank to the Secretariat for their invaluable help in organizing this. I hope that the outside looks a lot more smooth than what the inside is. You would have seen secret notes passing around. Towards the brief of the overall committee, I will provide a brief report on this, but there will also be a formal report issues. Until then, I hope you have all taken away something from this session, and that we can all collaborate together in the space to further progress our approach and really maximize the opportunities that are coming up from e-commerce. With this and an attempt to get brownie points for finishing early as well, I conclude my moderation and I will hand over to our committee chair who might want to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Diego and to Dora for your excellent work in moderating these 2 thematic sessions. And I'd also like to thank all the speakers and all the delegations for your valuable inputs. I think it was very exciting to learn about how digital technologies and tools can be used in designing and applying various good regulatory practices, and about the best practices for addressing challenges related to conformity assessments of goods obtained through e-commerce. I think we've all learned a lot, and we can see that there's a lot of space for further international cooperation. So thank you for these very productive and engaging sessions. And last but not least, I would also like to extend big thanks to the Secretariat team and for our interpreters for your support. So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing all you colleagues bright and early tomorrow morning at our regular session starting at 10 a.m. Thank you.